The Battle of Cold Harbor, Grant's gamble, Lee's last stand, and the bloodiest mistake of the Civil War. What if I told you that one of the bloodiest mistakes in Civil War history happened because of a single misstep, a night march gone terribly wrong? How could a battle that seemed so well planned turn into a slaughter so devastating? Even General Grant himself would later regret it. And why did seasoned soldiers, who had survived some of the war's fiercest fighting, pin their names to their uniforms, fully expecting to die the next morning? Welcome to Cold Harbor, where a deadly gamble, led by General Grant, collided with Robert E. Lee's last great stand, setting the stage for one of the Civil War's most tragic chapters. But this isn't just any story of battlefield blunders and tactical misfires. It's about confusion in the dark woods, generals second-guessing their every move, and soldiers marching toward a death trap they could see coming. What happened during that fateful night march that doomed thousands? Why did Grant push forward despite the odds? And how did a tiny crossroads with an ironic name become the site of such a monumental disaster? We're about to dive into the chaos, the strategy, and the raw humanity behind one of the war's most haunting moments. Buckle up, because this isn't just a history lesson, it's a story of risk, regret, and resilience that you won't want to miss. And hey, before you go charging off into Cold Harbor, remember to subscribe to our channel for more tales of war, politics, and the bitter lessons of history. Picture this, it's 1864, and the American Civil War has been grinding on for 3 long years. Soldiers on both sides have seen more blood than they ever thought possible, and the country itself seems like it's held together by little more than bayonet points and prayers. General Ulysses S. Grant, fresh off his promotion as commander of all Union forces, has a simple strategy: hit them hard, hit them often, and keep hitting them until they break. Some called Grant the Butcher for his cold calculus: wear down Robert E. Lee's Confederate army, no matter the cost in lives. War is hell, Grant famously said, and if you're going through hell, keep going. On the other side, General Robert E. Lee had his own problems. For 3 years, he had danced around Union forces, outwitting and outmaneuvering them in nearly every campaign. His soldiers loved him like a father, but those same soldiers were growing weary. The South was running out of men, and Lee knew that if he couldn't stop Grant, the war, and the Confederacy, would be lost. But if anyone could pull off a miracle, it was Lee. Grant wasn't interested in winning single battles, he wanted to grind Lee's army into dust. So, in May 1864, he launched the Overland Campaign, a series of battles designed to do just that. From the wilderness to Spotsylvania, Grant's forces hammered away at Lee, forcing him to retreat closer and closer to Richmond, the Confederate capital. Lee fought back brilliantly at every turn, but with each battle, his men were whittled down. It wasn't so much that Lee was losing, it's that Grant refused to lose. "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer," Grant said, and he meant it. But by June, as the two armies squared off near a little-known crossroads called Cold Harbor, Lee had one final trick up his sleeve: trenches. Now, let's get one thing straight before we begin: Cold Harbor was neither cold nor a harbor. It's like naming a desert, lush oasis, totally misleading. The name actually came from an old tavern that once sat at a key crossroads in Virginia. Cold referred to the lack of hot meals offered at the inn, and harbor meant a place of shelter. What made Cold Harbor so important wasn't a bustling harbor, but the fact that it was a critical junction connecting key routes to Richmond, the heart of the Confederacy. The landscape was a mixture of rolling fields, thick woods, and marshy ground, great if you wanted to dig in and defend yourself, but an absolute nightmare if you were trying to charge head-on at an entrenched enemy. In other words, Cold Harbor was about to become a Civil War meat grinder. Before the main battle even began, Cold Harbor saw action. Enter Major General Philip Sheridan, a cavalry commander with a personality as brash as his tactics. Sheridan was the type of leader who didn't just believe in aggressive warfare, he lived it. On June 1, 1864, Sheridan and his cavalry galloped into Cold Harbor like they were on a personal mission to make the Union famous for bold moves. And when they arrived, Sheridan made an equally bold statement to Grant: "I'll hold Cold Harbor till the army comes up, if it costs what few men I have left." Sheridan wasn't bluffing. His men dug in and held Cold Harbor until Grant's infantry arrived, but neither Sheridan nor Grant had any idea that the bloodiest day of their lives was about to unfold. By June 2, the Union Army was ready to engage. Grant, always aggressive, believed that relentless pressure would eventually break Robert E. Lee's lines. After all, that's what had worked in previous battles. But this time, Lee had the advantage of terrain and fortifications, and boy, did he use it. Meanwhile, Lee was preparing his defenses with Generals Jubal Early and John C. Breckinridge by his side. They dug deep into the Virginia soil, setting up miles of trenches and earthworks. These fortifications would soon become the Union soldiers' worst nightmare. Early and Breckinridge knew the terrain well and understood that Cold Harbor was perfect for their defensive strategy. They weren't just building trenches, they were constructing death traps. Over on the Union side, there was unease. Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, who had already faced hell at Gettysburg, muttered, "This is going to be a terrible slaughter." His gut feeling was disturbingly accurate. Meanwhile, Ambrose Burnside, who had a less-than-stellar track record, prepared his 9 Corps for the assault. Burnside, whose military blunders had already cost the Union dearly at Fredericksburg, wasn't exactly an inspiring presence. As if things weren't bad enough, the Union's plan for a night march into position turned into a logistical nightmare. Imagine thousands of soldiers stumbling around in the dark, through dense woods and swampy terrain. That's exactly what happened on the night of June 2nd. Major General William Baldy Smith and his men got hopelessly lost. The dark woods might as well have been a maze, and the Union army was left scattered and disorganized. Soldiers ended up miles off course, and what was supposed to be a coordinated attack became a case of, "Where the heck are we?" By the time the sun rose on June 3rd, Union troops were still out of position. The men were exhausted, confused, and running on fumes, but Grant, ever determined, decided to push forward anyway. What could go wrong, right? Well, everything. At precisely 4:30 a.m., the Union assault began. Thousands of Union soldiers, many of them veterans who knew what was coming, surged forward in a coordinated attack. But within minutes, it turned into a massacre. The Confederate trenches were perfectly designed for defense. Sharpshooters picked off soldiers from behind cover, while artillery shells rained down on the advancing Union forces. Lee's defenses were so effective that 7,000 Union soldiers were killed or wounded in the first 8 minutes. Think about that, 8 minutes. Some men didn't even make it 100 yards before being gunned down. One Confederate soldier, almost in disbelief, later said, "It wasn't war, it was murder." Union soldiers, realizing the futility of their assault, tried to dig shallow graves with their bayonets to protect themselves from the constant barrage. Many of them had written their names on pieces of paper and pinned them to their uniforms before the assault, knowing that death was almost certain. The battlefield was a scene of sheer horror. On the Confederate side, Robert E. Lee watched the slaughter unfold with grim satisfaction. He knew he had outsmarted Grant this time. Lee's right flank, commanded by Jubal Early, held firm under wave after wave of Union attacks. The center, led by Breckinridge, was a killing field where Union troops were mowed down in droves. Despite the chaos on the battlefield, Lee remained calm. Cold Harbor was another defensive victory for the Confederacy, but Lee knew it was only a temporary one. The Confederate army was running out of men and resources. Cold Harbor had bought them some time, but time was running out for the South. And what about Ambrose Burnside? Unfortunately, Burnside did little to redeem his reputation at Cold Harbor. His 9 Corps participated in the failed frontal assault, and, like the rest of the Union forces, his men were decimated. Burnside himself seemed to lack any real plan or direction once the initial assault failed. His presence on the battlefield was almost an afterthought. By the end of the day on June 3rd, the Union army had been soundly defeated. Yet, Grant refused to retreat. Instead, he dug in, preparing for a prolonged siege that would eventually lead to the fall of Petersburg and Richmond. But Cold Harbor haunted Grant. In his memoirs, he later wrote, "I have always regretted that the last assault at Cold Harbor was ever made." Cold Harbor wasn't just another battle, it was a wake-up call for Grant. The Union couldn't simply grind down the Confederacy through brute force. Strategy, precision, and caution were needed. For the men who survived, Cold Harbor was a harrowing memory, one that left them questioning the cost of war. After Cold Harbor, Grant shifted his focus to Petersburg, a vital Confederate rail hub. The Siege of Petersburg, which lasted almost 10 months, would be the final nail in the coffin for the Confederacy. Cold Harbor had been a brutal, bloody setback for Grant, but it didn't stop him from continuing his relentless push toward Richmond. As the smoke cleared and the dead were counted, Cold Harbor stood as one of the Civil War's most tragic and senseless battles. It wasn't just about strategy or tactics, it was about the raw, brutal reality of war. One Union soldier summed it up perfectly when he said, "War is hell, but Cold Harbor was the devil's playground." So, dear viewers, as we wrap up this sobering look at Cold Harbor, remember to hit that subscribe button for more riveting stories from the American Civil War.